Morning, everyone.
Morning.
I think sometimes when we come to church, it's important before we begin talking about the things we don't want to talk about, that we remind ourselves that the gospel is beautiful, that God's love meets us and welcomes us at our worst, not our best. That it says to us, in our ugliness, in our failure, in our loserness, in our can't get it togetherness, in our darkness, blessed are you. Blessed are you. Not when you get to be where you think you should be, but right here, right now, when it's all gone wrong. Blessed are you. Welcomed, loved, and accepted. That's going to be the last nice thing I say this morning. Because this morning we're carrying on this series, Things I Wish Jesus Never Said. Jesus was awesome, but there's a whole bunch of things he said that we as Christians really wish he didn't say, because they're so unworkable, unreasonable, downright harsh. And for me, this morning's teaching of Jesus is the harshest, because this morning's teaching has to do with the future. And the reason I think that's harsh, because the future is where so many of our fears lie. When you wake up at 3 a.m, you can't go back to sleep, you're thinking about the future and all the things that are probably going to go wrong. So this is going to be one of those Sundays in church yet again where we're going to have to embrace the suck. But hopefully we'll get somewhere, and it'll be good for us to hear it. Now, the first thing that we should say is that when we think about our life in the future, we tend to confuse having good intentions with making good decisions. We all intend to live well. I don't know a single human being who doesn't. When you think about the kind of life that you would like to have in 10 years' time, you intend, of course you do, that you're going to be in a loving, intimate relationship with your partner. You intend that you're going to have sufficient finances to fund your lifestyle. You intend that you're going to be fit and healthy enough to enjoy life, and so on. All of our intentions are good. Of course they are. Of course we want to have a good future, and we even know what having a good future looks like. And yet, irrespective of our very good intentions, there's often this strange discrepancy between the future we intend to have and the decisions we make on a day-by-day basis. Have a look at this. We'll get to what Jesus said in a moment, but first we'll start with Nerd Jesus, Steve Jobs. Is that wrong to say that?
Yes.
Oh, feeling the judgment right here. Okay, the blessed Steve Jobs said, "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future." So what Jobs is saying there is that life is connected. That there's some kind of a relationship between yesterday and today and tomorrow. And if you want to make better decisions that will take you to a better future, then you need to understand that life is linear. That A usually does lead to B, and B usually does lead to C. Now, when you do all of that Bible, prayer reading, Jesus following, coming to church Christian stuff, part of the reason why you do that is that you have an expectation that when you close your eyes in this world, you'll open them in the kingdom of heaven. Now I know that's a very crass caricature of your religious motivation. But there's nonetheless an extent to which that's true. Part of the deal we're in this for has something to do with heaven and the life to come. And I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of in saying that. Going to heaven when we die is something that we all intend to do, and I think expect to do. And I say all of that because at the very end of what has been a brilliant sermon, Jesus says, in effect, that there's no point in you having good Christian intentions. There's no point in you understanding any of the words I've spoken over the last 3 pages of the Bible. What you have to do is listen to what I say, and then having listened to it, you then have to make a series of decisions. Decisions that will take you from A to B and B to C and C to heaven. And for that reason, Jesus ends what has been essentially quite a humane, beautiful sermon with a series of warnings. First sentence up on the screen, please. Jesus says, totally ruined his sermon by adding this, by the way. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only few find it. Now, every time I read that sentence, I find myself wanting to be in the wrong place with the wrong people. And the reason for my wrong wanting is Jesus' use of vocabulary. I don't like the word narrow. I don't like narrow lips. I don't like narrow smiles. I certainly don't like narrow minds. The people I least like being around are people whose view on life is as limited as their experience of it. I don't even like the way the word narrow sounds. Narrow. It's an ugly word, isn't it? Narrow. Everyone with big hips in church this morning is thinking this is a great day to come. Narrow. It's a horrible word. However, on the other hand, I quite like the word broad. That's a great word. Broad lips, broad smile, broad mind. People who are open to life. I like that word very much. So, but yet the idea here is that listening to Jesus is akin to the choosing between two ways. One way that you quite like, and the other way that you quite don't. And it seems that the act of listening to Jesus' teaching places you in Robert Frost's well-known poem, "Two roads diverged in a wood, sorry I could not travel both, and so a traveller lone I stood," right? For Jesus, life is a road to be travelled, and seeing as how you only have one life, you cannot travel all possible roads. Therefore, you have to make some kind of a choice. And it's empowering, I suppose, to realise that you can make some kind of a choice. In the humanistically minded ancient world, this was a bit of a rebellious idea. It was a strike against the older, earlier notion that humans had no choices, that their fates were determined by the gods and the stars and all that stuff. And the only choices they made in life weren't real choices. They could choose what kind of breakfast cereal they had, but nothing important. Then in the early ancient world, like in ancient Greece, and Jesus would have been in with this too, people began to say, no, life's not like that. Your fate is not determined by the gods or by the stars. Your fate is determined by what you decide to do every single day. You can choose where you go. You can choose what kind of life you have and where it ends up. You have so much power, so much capacity. Good news, I suppose. Have a look at this. This comes from a well-known painting from ancient Greece called Hercules at the Crossroads. Apparently when he was a young man, Hercules came to a crossroads. He wasn't sure which way to go. And at the height of his uncertainty, two women mysteriously appeared and tried to persuade him in either direction. The one on the right is pleasure, and the one on the left is virtue. So the hero has to decide in this story, which path do I choose? Which life do I live? The life of pleasure or the life of virtue? What Jesus is saying here is somewhat similar. There should be a close relationship between your heavenly intentions and your earthly decisions. And your good Christian intentions, however sincere they may be, however genuinely they are held, are simply not enough. In fact, they may be dangerous because intention alone may be deluding you into thinking that you might be doing enough. And according to this horrible teaching, that's not the case. Because good Christian intention, according to Jesus, must be demonstrated in good Christian decisions. So he ends this Sermon on the Mount with a very pointed warning. He's saying, hey, I know what you're like. And I know you enjoy this Jesus thing. I know it's important to you. And I know you're digging all the things I'm saying. And I know that you intend to be a part of the kingdom of God. And I know that you've got a whole bunch of assumptions about where you stand with God and where you're going to be when you die and all that. And that's fine. That's good. You embrace that confidence. It's right. But you need to know that larger forces in life can take you somewhere where you did not intend to go. And so the imagery that he uses about the broad gate and the broad road with lots of people travelling upon it is to say that sometimes what appears to be normal is actually insane. When he speaks about a large crowd that are heading for destruction, he's saying, I just want you to know as Christians that if you're serious about this whole Jesus thing, there's going to be moments in your life where it really feels that you're swimming against the current. Like if you take Jesus, there's going to be moments in your life where you will look stupid and you will feel stupid and you will question your sanity. And in those moments, you will not have the comfort of the crowd. You will be alone wondering why you're doing this. What sense does it make? To say yes to Jesus is in some ways to say no to thousands of other things. And each of those no's will sting you. For example, to say yes to Jesus' teaching on forgiveness means to say no to bitterness and revenge. To say yes to Jesus' teaching on generosity means saying no to selfishness and greed. To say yes to what Jesus said previously about lust means saying no to the pleasures that lust gives. But you understand, saying yes to Jesus leads to the saying of 1,000 no's and 1,000 denials and 1,000 pains. And this is true also in life, I suppose. Pretty soon these handsome gentlemen will be competing in the Euros. I had to use Italians because Scotland weren't there. Again. Now, these guys have made it. They got to where they wanted to go. I presume at some earlier point in their life they said yes to the ambition of being a professional football player. And saying yes to that ambition led to the saying of many, many subsequent no's, right? No to laziness, no to Big Mac and fries, no to drugs, no to late nights out. Life is like this. Every ambition and intention must be backed by 1,000 other denials and rejections. One yes may involve 1,000 subsequent no's. This is why Jesus says that the way is narrow and difficult and small and found by only a few, because he wants people to know that you don't drift into a Christian life. You don't accidentally end up in heaven. And while his audience are getting their head around that, and I'm not sure they did, I'm not sure I do, he hits them with another warning. He says, watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. In the ancient world, the wolf was not merely a dangerous dog-like animal. It was, in their superstitious minds, a demonic creature thought to be capable of shape-shifting from an animal into a harmless human. And this is where the legend of the werewolf comes from. For example, have a look at this ancient text. So this was written by a Roman writer, writing about the same time as the New Testament. And he says that he's lying, I think, but he says it nonetheless. My friend, without warning, stripped his clothes and then piled them by the roadside and then turned into a wolf. Maybe he just had a hairy back and he got confused. Whereupon he began howling and ran off into the woods. Now that's a bizarre line in ancient literature. It's probably untrue, but it is nonetheless a recurring theme in ancient writings. Well-respected writers from all across the ancient world, people like Herodotus and Pliny, people whose observations form the basis of what we today take for granted in historical studies, they all talk about humans turning into wolves. Why do they do that? Is it because people they knew actually did turn into wolves? Or is it their ancient way of talking about the inherent hiddenness of evil? Evil that is obvious is not all that evil, because you can see it and act accordingly. True evil, the kind the Bible describes, isn't at all like that. True evil tends to hide. Has that been your experience? The worst people you've ever met have been the people that you didn't think were all that bad at one point in your life. They seemed to be so nice, so good, so genuine. And then, turned out that wasn't the case. What does the Bible say about Satan? Does it say that he's got pointy horns and a big stick? Or does it say that he hides as an angel of light? Evil isn't what it appears to be. So Matthew's writing these words to the early church. And he knows that the early groups of Christians weren't all that susceptible to sin, right? He knows that they weren't stupid. So some guy came to church on a Sunday and stood where I'm standing and said, "Hey church, I've got a great idea. Let's, I don't know, do something bad." That's really lame vocabulary, isn't it? I could have thought of something. But if someone said something obvious, like tried to lead the church in a certain direction that was obviously unchristian, Matthew knows the church are going to say, "Screw you. We're with Jesus. We don't do that kind of thing." Matthew knows that the real danger is the person who is full of convincing Christian vocabulary, who talks about how much they pray and how much they read their Bible and how much God is speaking to them and how in tune they are with this and how in tune they are with that. And the point Matthew wants the church to understand is that just because someone looks like a duck and quacks like a duck doesn't mean they're a duck, right? There are people in life who are not what they seem to be. And you need to watch out for them. True in church, true in work, true in your dating life, true everywhere. And so because wolves in sheepskins are difficult to detect, Jesus then goes on to provide a method for figuring them out. And this method, I suppose, is the basis of police studies. Those of you who enjoy CSI will know that the discovery of a criminal is dependent upon that criminal leaving some trace or other of his or her activity. Next sentence. Jesus says, "By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, good trees bear good fruit, but bad trees bear bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire." I don't know what that means, but I don't like the sound of it. "Thus, by your fruit will you recognize them." So what Jesus is saying here is you have to be careful who you listen to, because some people are dangerous, and you will know who those people are by their fruit. That's what he says. Beyond that, I have no clue what he means. No clue. Normally the church applies this passage in the Bible to the whole business of morality. And so the church says, if a person is a good Christian, a genuine Christian, then they will have good Christian behavior. Does that sound right to you? It does? Well, if that's true, if it's true to say that you'll recognize a good Christian by their good Christian behavior, then what about the Pharisees, who Jesus hated? They had great behavior. They were more moral than you and I could ever hope to be. Where does that leave us? I don't know. I just confused you, which is fair because it is confusing. These very words were used by some of the enemies of the early Christians, like Paul. So Paul started a church in a place called Corinth, and people would go and listen to Paul, and they didn't like it, and so they would talk about the lack of fruit in his life. They would see something about his vocabulary, something about his appearance, something about his lifestyle, and they would say, that's not Christian, so therefore you're not the real deal. So it's unhelpful to get too hung up on what Jesus might mean in this sentence, beyond saying you have to be careful who you listen to. You have to be careful with your fellow human beings, because not all of them are all that they seem to be all of the time. So have your guard up. Have your boundaries in place. And while his audience are getting their head around that badly, he says something worse. He says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Now I'm really confused, because I thought everyone who said, Lord, Lord, would enter the kingdom of heaven. And the reason I said that is because this is the early Christian confession of faith. If you confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord, you will be saved. It's even written in the Bible. And yet here Jesus says, this is not the case. Now I think the point that Jesus is making, probably, is that confessing yourself as a Christian is not enough. Thinking that you're a Christian is not enough. There has to be some translation from your belief to your actions. Christianity is a verb, after all. It's how you live. It's what you do. Brings us to the next sentence. I think it's worse again. Jesus asks his audience to fast forward to the last bit of the movie where earth ends and heaven begins. And he says, many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord. So we're Christians, but we're super Christians. Did we not prophesy in your name? In your name did we not drive out demons? And in your name did we not perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I don't know you. Away from me, you evil doers. So what's going on here is a person is profoundly spiritual. We're talking in this sentence about a person who can teach the Bible, who can perform exorcisms, who can perform miracles. I think if I could do all those things, I'd be feeling pretty confident about my chances on the last day. And I mean, if this is not an indicator of some kind of good Christian life, then what on earth is? Where does that leave the likes of you and I, who struggle most days with our Christian lives? Whose success rate in Christianity is at best 50-50. And in a church like this, less than that, actually. No, I'm not joking. We're a house of sinners and saints. Like it's hard for us in the real world, in our real homes. It's a struggle. Where does this, if these guys in this sentence are on the outs, where are we with our issues and our past? It seems that none of the things that that the church traditionally value are valued by Jesus. It seems that being good at Christianity in the traditional sense counts for almost nothing. So maybe this is good news for you and me. Next sentence. It's not about what you believe, but what you do. Knowing the Christian vocabulary counts for nothing. Having extensive knowledge of the Bible counts for nothing, it seems. Being fluent in Christianese, worthless. What matters is doing it. It's doing it. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, the wind blew, and beat against that house. And the second half of that sentence is how this sermon ends. It fell with a crash. That's how Jesus closes his sermon. I can do better than that. How's that for a horrible ending? It fell with a crash. Be encouraged. It fell with a crash. That's the sentence Jesus wants his audience to walk away hearing. It fell with a crash. So if the Sermon on the Mount was a movie, it would not have a happy ending. It ends with disaster, with a falling and a failing and a crashing. And there's a paradox for me in this, because when the sermon starts, it starts well. It starts with a beautiful announcement that God is with us in our loserness, in our can't get it togetherness, in our brokenness, in our failure, in our temptation. We were told at the beginning of the sermon that we were blessed in the absence of our righteousness. The sermon started low and dirty, right where we are, and we loved it. We loved it. But it doesn't end like that. It ends rough and harsh. And I think the crash with which it ends is particularly tragic because it is so unexpected. Throughout this sermon, Jesus has spoken about hypocrites. People we often assume who are engaged in the act of fooling others. But for Jesus, the greatest deception is not the other people that we fool, but that we fool ourselves. We con ourselves into thinking that we're somewhere where we're not. And it worries him. So to be in a place where we hear the acceptance of Jesus, and it is beautiful, where we embrace the fact that he loves us at our worst, that love, that acceptance, it forces us to a place in life where we must make some kind of response to it. If this man loves me, with what I do, with what I struggle with, what should I do in response to that? Can't earn it because it's already been given. But what should I do to respond? What should I do in such a way that says, I understand that this man loves me? Our human relationships, I guess, are like this too, are they not? Being loved by someone is a beautiful thing. How does that love change you? How does it alter you? How do you demonstrate that you accept it? How do you hold it? This is what the words of Jesus asks us to consider. You know you're loved. Right now, you know it. Over to you. Time for a quick question. That's a good question, because it reminded me of something I should have said. Big parts of the so-called good news are bad news. Huge sections of the Bible are downright horrible. And they don't encourage us, they condemn us. Reading things like that in the Bible can send us one of two ways. One way is to leave church committed to pulling up our socks and trying harder. Got to do better, got to do better, got to do better, got to do better. The other way is to embrace the gospel of Jesus and to throw up our hands in horror and say, okay, I admit there is a huge absence of righteousness in my life. There are huge swathes of my life that are frankly un-Christian. And I know myself well enough to know that no matter how hard I try, that's really not going to change substantially. So here's where I am right now, Jesus. I'm accepting your love and your forgiveness and your mercy, and I'm throwing myself on what you did for me on the cross, not for what I can do this week by trying harder. You mentioned the Holy Spirit. The role of the Holy Spirit in our lives, to an extent, is to bring us to that realization where we trust what Jesus did on the cross for us and not in what we can do for ourselves. Good question. Any others? Yes.
You said the word Christian was a verb.
Yes.
What is a verb, and how do you spell that?
Sorry. So a verb is a doing word. So when I said that Christianity is a verb, well,
You didn't say verb. You said verb.
that's what I
I'm just being silly.
said. Well, you're not going to get to heaven now, are you? Name? We invented Christianity. No, Christianity. No, it was Pontius Pilate was born in Scotland. He was born in Perth, in Scotland. And I'll decide how I say it. It's a Scottish town. So, was another question over there? Yes, Mark. That sounds to me like the beginning of wisdom. No, it absolutely does. I'm very suspicious of people who understand everything and to have everything together. That is a sure sign to me that they understand nothing and that they don't have anything together. Christianity, even in its most simple gospel form, is complex. And the reason it's complex is because we are complex. We're talking about our best and our worst moments, our lightest and our darkest sides. We're talking about the bit where God meets us at our bad bits. That's complex. That's difficult. And here's why I think Jesus would quite like hanging out in this church, particularly, is because I think for everyone who comes here, the struggle is real. I don't think too many people who come to LifePoint pretend to have it all together. I think as a congregation we have large elements of dysfunction in all our lives. And we know from the Gospels that those are the people who Jesus liked hanging out with the most. So, and I think it's those things that connect us with Christianity most closely and with the Gospel most closely. When I come here on a Sunday and think I have it all together, I'm not really connected with the gospel. Because I don't need it, I just need me and my awesomeness. But when I come here on a Sunday and I'm particularly feeling that the struggle is real for me, and that that there's stuff it connects me with the gospel. And I think warnings are quite loving, are they not?
Oh yes.
We do say harsh things to our children, don't we? I mean, I do all the time. Like, if you don't stick in a school, you're going to end up in a bad place. You make bad decisions, it's going to take you somewhere nasty. That's a warning. Like, the other night I was leaving Vaughan Mills with my son, and there was a guy with a cardboard sign at the side of the road, and coming up to the cars, and I wound the window down, I gave him some money, but I didn't want to miss out on the teaching opportunity for my son. I said, number one, son, bad luck can take you to places like this. So you don't judge. The best of us are no more than a series of few bad lucks away from that happening. However, bad decisions can also take you to this place. So don't make bad decisions. Is that harsh or is that loving? It's awesome. And it's awesome parenting too. We're out of time. God bless you. See you next time.